We begin with the readings of the Passion story. The disciples were confused as Jesus led them toward Jerusalem, and his other followers were afraid. Once again, Jesus took the 12 disciples aside and told them what was going to happen to him. He said, "We are now on our way to Jerusalem, where God's chosen one will be handed over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law of Moses. They will sentence him to death and hand him over to the occupiers, who will make fun of him and spit on him. They will beat him and kill him, but 3 days later he will rise to life."
Jesus and his disciples reached Bethany, near the Mount of Olives. When they were getting close to Jerusalem, 2 of his disciples obtained a donkey and led it to Jesus.
They put some of their clothes on its back, and Jesus got on. Many people spread clothes out on the road, while others went to cut palm branches from the fields. In front of Jesus and behind him, people went shouting,
We see today that God's reign is almost here, just like it was promised to the great King David.
"Praise God, who is the greatest of all." What do we want? When do we want it?
What do we want? When do we want it?
Hooray for Jesus, God's chosen. Say it with me. Hooray for Jesus, God's chosen. Hooray for Jesus, God's chosen. Praise to Jesus, God's chosen. Praise God, who is the greatest of all.
After Jesus and his disciples reached Jerusalem, he went into the temple and began chasing out everyone who was selling and buying. He turned over the tables of the money changers and the benches of those who were selling doves. Jesus would not let anyone carry things through the temple.
Then he taught the people and said, "The scriptures say, 'My house should be called a place of worship for all nations,' but you have made it a place where robbers hide."
The religious authorities heard what Jesus said, and they started looking for a way to kill him. They were afraid of him because the crowds were completely amazed at his teachings.
And as he was walking through the temple, the nation's religious leaders came over to him. They asked, "What right do you have to do these things? Who gave you this authority?"
Jesus replied, "I have just one question to ask you. If you answer it, I will tell you where I got the right to do these things. Who gave John the right to baptize? Was it God in heaven or merely some human being?"
They thought it over and said to each other, "We can't just say that God gave John this right. Jesus will ask us why we didn't believe John."
On the other hand, these people think that John was a prophet. So we can't say that it was merely some human who gave John the right to baptize. They were afraid of the people who told Jesus, "We don't know."
"Then I won't tell you who gave me the right to do what I do," Jesus answered.
Jesus was sitting in the temple near the offering box and watching people put in their gifts. He noticed that many rich people were giving a lot of money. Finally, a poor widow came up and put in 2 coins, which were worth only a few pennies. Jesus told the disciples to gather around him. Then he said, "I tell you that this poor widow has put in more than all the others. Everyone else gave what they didn't need, but she is very poor and gave everything she had. Now she doesn't have a cent to live on."
Death of mercy, can there be mercy still reserved for me? there's mercy still. There is mercy still for me.
It was now 2 days before the Passover celebration and feast. The religious authorities were planning on how they could sneak around and have Jesus arrested and put to death. They were saying, "We must not do it during the festival because the people will riot." Judas Iscariot was one of the 12 disciples. He went to the chief priests and offered to help them arrest Jesus. They were glad to hear this, and they promised to pay him. So Judas started looking for a good chance to betray Jesus.
It was the first day of the festival, and the feast was ready. While Jesus and the 12 disciples were eating together that evening, he said, "The one who will betray me is now eating with me." This made the disciples sad, and one after another they said to Jesus,
You surely don't mean me.
You surely don't mean me.
You surely don't mean me.
He answered, "It is the one of you 12 who's eating from this dish with me. God's chosen person will die, just as the scriptures say. But it is going to be terrible for the one who betrays me. That one would be better off if he had never been born."
During the meal, Jesus took some bread in his hands. He blessed the bread and broke it. Then he gave it to his disciples and said, "Take this, it is my body." Jesus picked up a cup of wine and gave thanks to God. He gave it to his disciples, and they all drank some. Then he said, "This is my blood, which is poured out for many people." And with it, God makes his agreement. "From now on, I will not drink any wine until I drink new wine in God's kingdom." Then they sang a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives.
Jesus said to his disciples, "All of you will reject me, as the scriptures say, but after I am raised to life, I will return to Israel." Peter spoke up, "Even if all the others reject you, I will never will." Jesus replied, "This very night, before a rooster crows twice, you will say 3 times that you do not know me." But Peter was so sure of himself, and he said, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never say that I don't know you." All of the others said the same thing.
Jesus, even if I have to die with you, I will never say that I don't know you.
Even if I have to die with you, I will never say that I don't know you.
Even if I have to die with you, I will never say that I don't know you. Even if I have to die with you, I will never say that I don't know you.
Even if I have to die with you, I will never say that I don't know you. Even if I have to die with you, I will never say that I don't know you.
Even
if I have to die for you, I will never say that I don't know you.
Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he told them, "Sit here while I pray." Then Jesus took along Peter, James, and John. He was sad and troubled and told them, "I am so sad that I feel as if I am dying. Stay here and keep awake with me."
Jesus walked on a little way. Then he knelt down on the ground and prayed, "Father, if it is possible, don't let this happen to me. Father, you can do anything. Don't make me suffer by having me drink from this cup. But do what you want and not what I want."
When Jesus came back and found the disciples sleeping, he said to Simon Peter, "Are you asleep? Can't you stay awake for just 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you won't be tested. You want to do what is right, but you are weak."
Jesus went back and prayed the same prayer. But when he returned to the disciples, he found them sleeping again. They simply could not keep their eyes open, and they did not know what to say.
When Jesus returned to the disciples the third time, he said, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough of that. The time has come for the Son of Man to be handed over to sinners. Get up. The one who will betray me is already here."
Jesus was still speaking when Judas the betrayer came up. He was one of the 12 disciples, and a mob of men armed with swords and clubs were with him. They had been sent by the religious authorities and the nation's leaders. Judas had told them ahead of time, "Arrest the man I greet with an embrace. Tie him up and lead him away."
Judas walked right up to Jesus and said, "Teacher." Then Judas kissed him, and the men grabbed Jesus and arrested him.
Someone standing there pulled out a sword. He struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Jesus said, "Put your sword away. Don't you know that those who live by the sword shall die by the sword?"
Jesus said to the mob, "Why do you come to me with swords and clubs to arrest me like a criminal? Day after day I was with you and taught in the temple, and you didn't arrest me. But what the scriptures say must come true."
All of Jesus' disciples ran off and left him.
All of Jesus' disciples ran off and left him.
I ran away.
I ran away. I ran away. I ran away.
Jesus was led off to the council chambers. Then the chief priests, the nation's leaders, and the teachers of the law of Moses all met together.
Peter had followed at a distance, and when he reached the courtyard of the high priest, he sat down with the guards to warm himself by a fire.
The chief priests and the whole council tried to find someone to accuse Jesus of a crime so they could put him to death, but they could find no one to accuse him.
Many people did tell lies against Jesus, but they did not agree on what they said. The high priest stood up in the council and asked Jesus, "Why don't you say something in your own defense? Don't you hear the charges they are making against you?"
But Jesus kept quiet and did not say a word.
The high priest asked him another question. "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the glorious God?" "Yes, I am," Jesus answered. "Soon you will see God's chosen sitting at the side of God, all-powerful in heaven."
At once, the high priest ripped his robe apart and shouted, "Why do we need more witnesses? You heard him claim to be God. What is your decision?" They all agreed that he should be put to death. Some of the people started spitting on Jesus. They blindfolded him, hit him with their fists, and said, "Tell us who hit you." Then the guards took charge of Jesus, and they beat him.
While Peter was still in a courtyard, a servant girl of the high priest came up and saw Peter warming himself by the fire.
She stared at him and said, "You were with Jesus from Nazareth."
Peter replied, "That isn't true. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have any idea what you mean." He went out to the gate, and a rooster crowed.
The servant girl saw Peter again and said to the people standing there, "This man is one of them."
"No, I'm not," Peter replied.
A little while later, some of the people said to Peter, "You certainly are one of them. You're a Galilean."
This time, Peter began to curse and swear and said,
"I don't even know the man you're talking about."
Right away, the rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered that Jesus had told him, "Before a rooster crows twice, you will say 3 times that you don't know me." So Peter started crying.
Early the next morning, the religious leaders had Jesus tied up and took him to Pilate, the Roman governor of Israel.
He asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?"
"Those are your words," Jesus answered.
The religious leaders brought many charges against Jesus. Then Pilate questioned him again. "Don't you have anything to say? Don't you hear what crimes they say you have done?" But Jesus did not answer, and Pilate was amazed.
Then Pilate asked the crowd, "What do you want me to do with this man you say is the king of the Jews?"
They yelled, "Nail him to a cross. Crucify him."
"But what crimes has he done?"
"Nail him to a cross," they yelled even louder.
Pilate wanted to please the crowd, so he set Barabbas free. Then he ordered the soldiers to beat Jesus with a whip and nailed him to a cross.
The soldiers led Jesus inside the courtyard of the Roman fortress and called together the rest of the troops. They put a purple robe on him, and on his head they placed a crown that they had made out of thorn branches. They made fun of Jesus and shouted, "Hey, you, King of the Jews!" Then they beat him on the head with a stick. They spit on him and knelt down to pretend to worship him.
The soldiers took Jesus to Skull Hill. There they gave him some wine mixed with a drug to ease the pain, but he refused to drink it.
They nailed Jesus to a cross and gambled to see who would get his clothes. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning when they nailed him to the cross. On it was a sign that told why he was nailed there. It read, "This is the King of Judah." The soldiers also nailed 2 criminals on crosses, one to the right of Jesus and the other to his left.
People who passed by said terrible things about Jesus. They shook their heads and shouted, "Ha! So you're the one who claimed you could tear down the temple and build it again in 3 days. Save yourself and come down from the cross."
The chief priests and the teachers of the law of Moses also made fun of Jesus. They said to each other, "He saved others, but he can't save himself. If he is the Messiah, the King of Israel, let him come down from the cross. Then we will see and believe." The 2 criminals also said cruel things to Jesus.
At noon, the sky turned dark and stayed that way until around 3 o'clock. Then Jesus shouted, my God, why have you deserted me?"
In that language, the word God sounds like the name Elijah. Some of the people standing there heard Jesus and said, "He is calling for Elijah." One of them ran and grabbed a sponge. After he had soaked it in wine, he put it on a stick and held it up to Jesus. He said, "Let's wait and see if Elijah will come and take him down."
Jesus shouted loudly and then died. At once, the curtain in the temple that separates God's holy place from the people tore in two from top to bottom.
A Roman army officer was standing in the front of Jesus. When the officer saw how Jesus died, he said, "This man really was the Son of God."
Some women were looking on from a distance. They had come with Jesus to Jerusalem, but even before this, they had been his followers and had helped him while he was in Galilee.
Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of the younger James, and of Joseph, were two of these women. Salome was also one of them.
It was now the evening before the Sabbath, and the people were getting ready for that sacred day.
A man named Joseph of Arimathea was brave enough to ask Pilate for the body of Jesus. Joseph was a highly respected member of the Jewish council, and he was also waiting for the reign of God to come.
Pilate was surprised to hear that Jesus was already dead, and he called in the army officer to find out if Jesus had been dead very long. After the officer told him, Pilate let Joseph have Jesus' body.
Joseph bought a linen cloth and took the body down from the cross. He had it wrapped in the cloth, and he put it in a tomb that had been cut into solid rock. Then he rolled a big stone against the entrance to the tomb.
This concludes our service for today. We will continue with it on Thursday night at the Maundy Thursday service, and then again next week on Easter morning. It is very often my custom to say to you at the end of the service, "Go in peace." But today, I want you to go troubled. Troubled with what we have heard, troubled with what we know is our part in this world, troubled with the pain that so many suffer. Let us not forget all of this. Let's not forget what was done to Jesus. Let's not forget what we have done to others in this world. And let us pray for God's reign to come to all of us. Amen.
You've been listening to The Last Days of Jesus, featuring the voices of Reverend Stephen Carnahan, pastor of High Street Congregational Church in Auburn, Maine, and volunteer members of our congregation. If you feel inspired by what you hear, we invite you to join us in person for worship services every Sunday morning beginning at 10 o'clock. Of course, you can always listen to our regular church sermons on the web. New sermons are posted every Monday by midday. Please take a moment to explore this website for more information about our church, or visit our Facebook page at High Street Congregational Church, UCC, where you'll find the video version of our sermons as well. We hope that God's presence will be known to you every hour of every day. May God's blessings rest upon you now and always. See you on Easter Sunday.